So I've written 4 books, and I have in the pipeline somewhere between 10 books and 20 books more that I've done the research, written thousands of pages, and organized them into books. But I'll need to produce one at a time, and given my health, aging, and whatnot, I just want to make sure I can get them out, because I don't know if I can get this many out. And I need help with assistance and whatever anybody want to help me. I'm more than happy to get that help. So the 4 books I've done are as follows. The first book I did not put out in my own name. I wrote most of it. I put it out as articles, and then somebody said that the articles, your fights with Wendy Doniger and a whole group of people who are doing this Freudian psychoanalysis of Hinduism, making fun of deities, making fun of gurus, making fun of Shiva, Ganesh, Goddess, Krishna, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, making fun of all these people, vulgar, insulting things. All these debates you've done with opponents need to be organized into a book with he said, she said, all the details. But it will be better if it's done by an independent people, so it looks objective. So I got some people, and I worked with them closely because they were busy people and helped put all this together. But that book was published under their name. But the whole book is about my encounters with the Academy. And that book is called Invading the Sacred. And I won this battle in the US against the whole Wendy Doniger clan. And the Wendy Doniger, who's a prominent Hinduism scholar and pioneers these kind of negative scholarship, became less important in the Academy because as a result of these interactions, very few people were going to her for a PhD. Previously, people lined up to get a PhD under her, very prestigious, but then it was stigmatized, became a taboo, and these people are no longer going to her. And her major students, who were in top positions, Emory University, here, there, top positions, one is in Duke, they were also on the defensive as a result of this one-man fight with these guys. And so then there was kind of a truce that I moved on to many other books, many other topics. I cannot just spend my whole life on one problem. And these people were quiet. But then they made an alliance with the Indian left, because the Indian left is looking for anti-Hindu masala also. But they don't have the scholarship. These people have the scholarship. These people have the scholarship. Those people have the need, political need. But they don't know Sanskrit. They are not well read in philosophy. They don't understand the texts. These guys, the scholars are here. And these scholars said, rather than fighting Rajiv here, we quietly go to India, build our bridges, fight over there. And that's what they quietly did. So then Wendy Doniger started publishing her things in India, and things which here were just considered mediocre, not that important, became like bestsellers in India. Because she got an award, she was promoted as some kind of a Hinduism scholar. And nobody in India early on took this as a serious matter. I told many people, this is going to become a very serious matter for you. You better nip it in the bud, you better take her on early. And people wouldn't take it as my advice. And I was too busy doing other projects because I was producing other books. So now all of a sudden in the last few months or few years, India has erupted with huge fight with Wendy Doniger and her clan, and her camp is supported by all the NDTV are on her side, Hindu newspaper, Times of India newspaper, Outlook, all those guys promoting her idea and positioning the Hindus as a bunch of narrow-minded fanatics, not able to handle free speech, those kind of goons, ruffians, throwing eggs at her. So that is the branding that she has created for her opponents very successfully. Okay, and don't be surprised if she gets a President's Award or something next year. Sheldon Pollock got, and he's a prominent Sanskrit scholar, and his position is very clear that this Aryan dividend divide, he believes in the Aryan theory, and he believes that Sanskrit is an oppressive language that has oppressed women and Dalits. He believes in that. He got President's Award. And he got $15 million grant from Narayan Murthy to be the one who's going to be the editor translating classical Indian texts into English. So you can see what kind of lens he'll use. So if you look at how many of these kind of people have been awarded in India, okay, it's very clear they've infiltrated, won over the Indian intelligentsia, the Indian media, the Indian government, these kind of things. You look at these literary festivals like the Jaipur Literary Festival, is certain kind of people that are invited. So when I've asked them many times, give me a position to counteract. I will like to debate. And you guys are for free speech supposedly. Give me a slot. No, never, not once. Television, never an interview on any of my books. So you see, the American origin of a certain spin on Indian civilization and Hinduism has found an alliance with Indian left. Okay, it's a very important point to understand. So this is a foreign nexus, international India-US, India-West nexus. So the Christianity is a nexus where foreign headquarters, churches have branch offices in India. Academic and intellectual is a nexus. You see? So the second book, which is called Breaking India, came out in 2011. Is a bestseller. They've had 10, 12, 15 reprints. I've lost touch. Now they're printing another one. It is a book on how these nexuses based in the Western world operating through sepoys. I call them sepoys in India because these sepoys was a term. I know people say, why don't you say sipahi? What they don't get it is that they were called sepoys. And I want to use that term to label and brand the Indians who are sepoys. Those sepoys were carrying uniforms, carrying the Union Jack flag, and they were, it's okay. They were carrying the Union Jack flag. Those sepoys were carrying the Union Jack flag, wearing their uniform, firing bullets at the Indians under the British command. In Jallianwala Bagh, General Dyer gave the command, but every bullet was fired by an Indian. So the point I'm trying to make by using this terminology is that now we have intellectual sepoys. I mean, they are basically funded from somewhere. They are given the ideology. They are trained. They are trained in the Western world and sent back. You know, British Council has a huge campaign to bring Indian journalists to England, to London for summer of training. And the who's who of English language media have gone through this campaign over the last 10 years. I know some of the people. So they come back very impressed and they're very loyal. They are fed certain seminars. This is the Dalit strategy, the idea, this is the women's exploitation, this is this, that. They're told what the talking points are. These guys are not so smart. They don't read hundreds of books which are hundreds of pages. And they just get the bullet points, the talking points. They go back and they spit it out. US consulate does this with, they have conclaves in Goa and all that. Now they stop doing it because they can fund people like Tejpal to do this Goa fest. And they can fund this guy Daryl Limple, who's an British guy, Scottish guy, who's, by the way, whose grandparents and all were working for the East India Company. They were looters in Madras presidency. He's a descendant of that genre. And so he's now controlling the literary festivals in India. So media also are very much in awe of these kind of people. And some of the Indians who are getting this award, that award, Booker Award, Pulitzer Award, whatnot, or otherwise international bestsellers, are basically built up in the West, built up as sort of big and exported, that fame is exported. So the difference between the British era sepoys and the sepoys of today is that those guys, you know, in England there were white people in command and brown people working for them. And now they've got enough brown people to become commanders. Some of them can even get a Nobel Prize and sit in Harvard. Some of them. So you know, there's the sepoys have become have advanced. You know, they can get high positions now. But the intellectual framework in which they're operating is what I call Western universalism. The Western thought is universal. Other thought has to be mapped onto the Western thought as universal. Whether it is language, like we're using English, whether it is the framework, whether it's the philosophy, whether it's the metaphysics, whatever it is the West is the gold standard. So this brings me to my third book, which is Being Different. Being Different also became a bestseller, also constantly being reprinted. Being Different is a book which says how the Dharma civilization, thinking, categories, our drishti, our vision, how it is different from Western Abrahamic religions, also Western secular Enlightenment tradition. Because West has got two. It's a combination of the Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, and the Enlightenment secular tradition. And it says, the book basically takes on many, many issues and shows that on each of these issues, these are the differences. So for example, I explained that there are certain Sanskrit words which are non-translatable. There is no English word like that. And the English translation being commonly used is actually a mistranslation. It is misleading you. It is not something that we should be engaged in. We should not be translating those words. We can speak English, but do not use the English equivalent of some words. Use the Sanskrit original as part of your English speech. We don't translate yoga as exercise or prayer. So we should not translate dharma as religion. And I've explained what is the difference between dharma and religion. Big difference, I've explained. How Shakti is not energy, it's not like electricity. Okay? Because this is not the same thing as Shakti. That Pran isn't there. It's not, the Pran and the divinity, the intelligence. Okay? So some of these words, and I've given 20 examples of Sanskrit non-translatables, but there are hundreds of Sanskrit words that are non-translatable. The more Sanskrit non-translatable you can introduce into your English vocabulary and make it part of your daily talk conversation with the confidence that you can explain what it is, why it is not that English word, what is different, what is the distortion if you replace it. The more you can do that, the better. That's what I'm trying to say in this book. I'm also explaining the difference between Westerners and Indians in the way people have a cognization of chaos. In the West, it is order is good, chaos is bad, it is devilish, it's evil, and in the Indian ethos, there is a balance between the two. The chaos can also be within a certain limits, within a certain bounds. It can also be very creative. And so there's more comfort with diversity, with uncertainty, with unpredictability. Indians are more comfortable with that, can handle better if things don't go exactly like you planned. So I've given deep philosophical reasons, going back to the biblical origins, going back to Samudra Manthan. The cover of the book is Samudra Manthan, to explain these kind of concepts. I've also explained the inner journey of the Indian ethos, where you have the ability to recover and rediscover for yourself the ultimate reality without recourse to a book or to a historical event, but because that whole thing is mapped inside you, and you can discover it sitting right here, which I call embodied knowing, which means knowing through my own body. This is the whole Rishi experience, this is the whole meditation experience, this is what we excel in. Our civilization excels in that. The difference between that and the Western dependence and over-dependence on an absolute history which happened in the Middle East, in the desert, to some people, and only they were told something which will never be told to anyone else, nobody else can ever know it. It was never told before, never told after, and so the only way you can know this truth is if you go through that history. That history is only known to this particular institution in the church, and so you are dependent on them, and without that access, you are doomed to hell. Yeah? So I have a site that you should visit called hindugoodnews.com. So you should visit that site, hindugoodnews.com, where I give you the difference between the Christian good news and the Hindu good news. I explain in that. Christian good news is that the Savior has come to save you. So often the doorbell rings, some guys come to my house and they say, "Sir, can we talk to you a little bit?" They're very nice. I know that they're from the church, And before being sent to India, they have to get practice local labor. And then when they're able to handle the local, then they can go to the next job. I know that. So I bring them in, talk to them nicely, give them chai, sit down. I pretend like I don't know, but actually I know who they are. So they sit here, 3-4 of them, nice, young, they're usually young people, very well dressed and nice groomed people, And so they have small conversation, little to make, they're told that first you don't get to the point, you have to establish comfort. They've really trained all these things. And they may like some picture or some decor or something like small talk. And then they look at each other like who goes first, Between them they have to decide, okay, now it's your turn. So one of them then has to take the lead. So he says, sir, can we ask you a personal question? So I say, sure, go ahead. I know what they want to say. So I said, please. So they said, sir, have you been saved? So now they're expecting, they're trained, but I don't want to give the answer they're expecting. So they're expecting the person will say, oh yeah, I've been saved, and then they'll say, how? And then he'll say, oh, I believe in Krishna, and they'll say, no, but you can't be saved that way. So they're used to a certain line of attack. So I pretend like I don't, so I say, saved. Saved from what? What? And so they don't really know. They don't really know how to answer somebody who's doesn't think he needs to be saved. And then they talk about, have you heard the good news? Which they're really meaning that, Jesus can save you. And I asked them, did the stock market go up? Did the price of gold change? What good news? You telling good news? I don't know the good news. What is good news? So they try. Then they feel this guy is really dumb. He's kind of this guy. You really have to work on him. So I have a lot of fun with these kids. So they I keep returning that with questions. So it comes down to, we're all sinners. We will be saved from it. So I say, well, sinner, you look like nice people. I don't think you've done anything wrong. You're not sinners. Are you sinners? What have you done? And so they have to tell me that there is this Adam and Eve did something that was cursed by God, that is called original sin. And God said that all future progeny, all humanity that born out of you will be born sinners. So we are sinners, sir. So then I keep wanting to talk. I give them time because I have fun also. And so then some of them bring back a senior leader for a future visit to. They say we bring so and so, and he can answer these questions. So then other people also come. So eventually I get them to a point where I'm able to tell them that, look, I'll tell you the Hindu good news. Because you told me the Jesus good news, Christian good news, I'll tell you Hindu good news. That there is no such thing as original sin. We are all originally divine. And we call it Satchitanand, which means that we are originally divine. We are Satchitanand. And so we are not original sinners. We are originally divine. So there is no savior, the whole cosmology, the whole emphasis, the whole premise is different. The purpose of telling you this is that you can take over this game on your own turf. You can bring it to your own paradigm. Rather than fighting on their paradigm, have I been saved, have I not been saved? I don't want to fight on that paradigm. I'm fighting on the paradigm, we are originally divine, we are Satchitanand, you're also Satchitanand. You're just not aware of it, but you're Satchitanand. So the question is how to achieve the Satchitanand. Now if the question is how to achieve Satchitanand, I'm in control because I know more than they don't have thought of it. If the discussion were how to get saved from sin, then they are in control. So I don't want to give them control of vocabulary and control of paradigm and framework. You see, we have to teach our people like that. So this book is full of these kind of debates between the two sides. And then the latest book which just came out last month, I think is the most important book I have done. It's called, it is on the philosophical unity of Hinduism. It is on the philosophical unity of Hinduism, which is under attack. There is a huge movement, which is, oh thank you so much, thanks. There is a huge movement in the intellectual world that Hinduism is a fabrication. There was no such thing until the British came and Vivekananda put many hodgepodge things together. But prior to that, there were many conflicting, contradictory, different views going. Vaishnavas fighting Shaivites, and this community fighting that community. Philosophy contradictory to each other. Many deities, all chaos. And there was no such thing as a unified, coherent Hinduism. And Vivekananda just made it up to have unified India in order to get rid of the British and give Indians a sense of unity and pride. So Hinduism is a facade. It's a hoax. And they have books like Was Hinduism Manufactured? Books like that. Was Hinduism Manufactured? The hoax of Hinduism. Was Hinduism fabricated? And academic people. I'm not talking about church demagogues. I'm not talking about political people. I'm talking about people from prestigious places, people with doctorates and from Ivy Leagues who are given awards for these books and these kind of works are written up in the prestigious press. So this book I've written shows the origins of this whole Neo-Hinduism thesis. This is called the Neo-Hinduism thesis. And then it shows how it reached India. it reached India, and now it's become for the left, and for people who feel that they're not saying anything wrong, secularized Hindus, this has become the staple. To talk about that Hinduism is just a recent construction, and it doesn't have any link with anything ancient, it is just a hodgepodge of things. And so, this book, part one of this book is my Purva Paksha, which means my analysis and my study of these opponents, and where they're coming from, what is their argument, what is the issue with it, what are their assumptions. I've given very detailed. On each of the 4 or 5 major founding heads, the originators of this thesis, I've given a separate chapter. And then the second part is Uttar Paksha, which is my response, giving my response that this is actually, this whole thesis of Neo-Hinduism is full of problems, shooting holes through it, and showing that in spite of all this diversity and all these disagreements and debate, there are common assumptions, there is a unity, there is a coherence, and there is a continuity. So I'm trying to show that. Now, this is going to start a big fight, because I have shown that many of the prominent Indian liberal left thinkers are inflicted with this Neo-Hinduism disease. Pankaj Mishra, who gets all these awards, these Ramachandra Guha, this Arundhati Roy, all these people on the TV, the Hindu newspaper carries their articles, Times of India carries their articles. Indian and supposedly so-called Hindu writers are talking about this. They are themselves involved in the same disease the same way. So for example, Devdutt Pattanaik, who writes all these things about Hinduism, is a great follower of Wendy Doniger. He's one of the biggest supporters of Wendy Doniger. Yeah, he's turned Hinduism into myth. He calls it myth. So I've had a lot of debate with him on why is it myth, why not itihas, and why myth puts in doubt that it is not really authentic. But this business of mythologizing Shiva, Krishna, all this, and making it, but at the same time making Hindus feel that he's one of us because he can talk in a certain way. Very dangerous. The biggest threat are people amongst us who are undermining us from within. So this is a very clever thing they have done. So you look at in this debate with Wendy Doniger, people like me and Wendy Doniger, people like Devdutt Pattanaik supporting them, writing interviews, articles, supporting them, right and left, without any doubt. Now, I called Devdutt Pattanaik and said, a lot of your ideas you've taken from my work, but not attributed. And worse than that, you've twisted it. So for instance, the comfort with chaos. Immediately soon after my book came out, he would start talking about it, into TED Talks and prestigious forums where I'm not invited, but he can go talk about my ideas as his own. The difference between Shruti and Smriti and why it matters. He's talking about all this. So he was a little embarrassed, but he said things like, oh, but I'm actually helping you because I'm taking your ideas into the mainstream. So I said, when King George V was told, why have you stolen the Kohinoor? He said, the people of India should be very proud because I'm bringing it to the attention of the whole empire. Yeah. A thief could steal your stuff and say, I'll popularize this art used to be in your house. I won't even tell them it's in your house because you're not such a good reputation, so it will not be really good for you to say that it was your art. But I'll say it's my art, then this art will become more famous, sir. So in a sense, I'm helping you. That kind of a thing. I told this to Devdutt Pattanaik. So at first he said, I don't really I know about your work. He couldn't say that he doesn't know about my work, but I'm not that deep, Now, I was telling my friend Santji, I have an email list of about 70,000 names of people who attend these events. I tell them to put them on my email list, and I send out an email blast of announcing new talk, new YouTube. And to manage this email list, there's a service called Eye Contact, like Constant Contact, Eye Contact. They manage mailing lists, and they send out these things for you. They keep track of duplicates, and people can unsubscribe. And one of the things that they do is that they can tell you who's opened the mail and who's clicked a video. If you have 4 or 5 links, they'll even tell you which link was clicked. And the whole history of a person. So I looked up Devdutt Pattanaik's history of he's on my Eye Contact database. And he's been clicking. So then I called him. I didn't want to tell him that because I still haven't told him. I think I'll cut this pitas. Because it's very good. It's very good when I meet people who say, "Acha, aap kaun hai? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. I have also thought of this." I go and look it up. He's been watching my videos for a long time. So it's one thing to be inspired and influenced that you like. But when the person is appropriating it, misappropriating it, plagiarizing it, calling it his own, distorting it, twisting it around, and actually putting it into the framework of my opponents, it's not a right thing to do. So you see, we got a lot of problems in our community with our own people like that, and we are funding such people. Most people are, in fact, most people, I went to Bombay, they said, you should meet Devdutt Patnaik, he's a good man, he'll help you, he knows. Now, see, this is what, so we have to be careful, we have to understand the big game going on. Very sophisticated. One of the things that helps me in my work is that I have a huge international career before I got into this, because when I was in the corporate world, I was doing international strategic planning, business ventures. I was going to all these. I was going to deal with China, Japan, Europe, all the countries in Europe, basically negotiating with them in top level, senior level. So I understand the diplomacy, the very sophisticated, the very nice way of saying things. I know that game. I can play that game. But I find that a lot of our people are very naive on this. They are easily swayed because somebody is sweet. They say, no, but he talks nicely, his wife wears bindi, and she even came in a sari. She came in a sari and he sang a bhajan in our temple. So our people are such naive about this. Wendy Doniger, until I exposed her, was annually brought to Chicago, one of the major temples, given honorarium like $10,000 and so on, as a chief guest. And she would come and bless the occasion and do their annual event and blah, blah, blah. She was like the big deity there. So many of these people are like that. So you see, they're very angry that I exposed, that this is a double life. That in front of you in your temple, they're very respectful. But behind your back, there are certain things going on. Diana Eck got rid of Subramaniam Swami's Harvard position. She led the whole thing. All these years I've been telling people that she write a book on Banaras. You're very impressed. She comes to some place and she can chant some Sanskrit and whatnot, and you guys are very impressed. But you really have to know the people much more. Aapko pariksha karni hai. You have to do due diligence on these people before you start patronizing them. Nobody believed me. But when this hit, now everybody knows that, okay, we've got to be careful, you see. So I'll stop. And because, once I get started, I can just go on. But Shanti tells me I should stop, so I stop. So,